And we're going to talk today about the flexible rentals, which is the $300 billion opportunity. And I'm bringing in Merilee Karr to talk about this opportunity. She's, as I stated at the break, she's the president of the UK Short-Term Accommodation Association and the CEO of UnderTheDoormat Group. Her vision to help every property fulfill its potential by making professional short-term rentals accessible to everyone. I'm inspired by her work. She's the industry spokesperson, speaking on the BBC, Sky News, and major publications in the Times and the Guardian and Huffington Post, you name it. There's all kinds of trust around the things that she's created to create value for people. And she's worked with both UK and EU governments in the industry policy and helped shape or even establish the first industry accreditation program backed by the UK government. So Merilee, welcome in.
Welcome. Great to be here, Patrick.
Yeah, so great to be with you. So tell me a little bit about, you're doing a lot of work outside of the U.S., but you're not from the U.K., you're here from the U.S. Tell me a little bit about what brought you to the U.K.
Yeah, well, look, I grew up in the U.S. in Ohio, so I'll always be an American, but I've spent the last 20 years in the U.K. For me, what's really exciting is looking at how this market's evolving both in Europe and in the U.S. And I think there's things we can learn from both sides. Certainly, one of the things I see in Europe is that, the short-term and flexible rental market is actually ahead in terms of size that we have in the US, but we see, especially in a post-COVID world, the US market quickly catching up. I would say, though, at least what we can see from the multifamily sector is the US is the powerhouse, and it's Europe learning from you guys. And so I think where our two industries can work together and collaborate, I think there's loads that we can learn across the pond.
Yeah, so talking about multifamily being the powerhouse in the U.S., how big is this market for this short-term rental? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so look, there are various different projections. PwC is obviously a pretty reliable source. They reckon that it's a $330 billion market by 2025, and that's only a few years from now. Even pre-COVID, the market was growing at about 30% year on year. So that's, really fast growth. And what we're seeing from the data coming out of COVID is actually that growth is accelerating. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is that, often when people think of our industry, the first thing they think about is Airbnb. But the industry is really professionalizing. And I think that's where it becomes really interesting as well for the multifamily industry to learn and see where the opportunities are for these industries to work together. So that $330 billion market is where we expect to be by 2025. But what we also see is that business travel is also now starting to change and increasingly looking for individual apartments for people to stay in. Business trips are changing shape. And there's access as well to that market, which is also a $156 billion market. So we're talking about huge markets that are quickly changing, and the opportunities to access it and really extract some value from this market for the multifamily sector are huge.
What is the difference, though, between the two? I know you mentioned a little bit there, but if you're an investor, what can we learn from that market to take back here in the U.S., I guess?
Well, look, I think what there is to learn is that consumers are increasingly wanting flexibility in everything they purchase. The kind of buy on demand, services on demand, everything is at people's fingertips, and they've got the ability to kind of choose something and then choose something else a week later. And I think this idea that consumers want to lock into 1, 2, 3 year rentals is something that we're going to see changing. And I think, that's something that can be scary, but it's also something that can be an opportunity. Because let's be honest, when you talk about digital nomads, you see the way work is changing and the way people live is changing. Some of the most attractive residents that you want to be having living in your developments are exactly the people that are going to be demanding flexibility. And so if you're the one who can offer that, the ability to optimize the yields in your development is going to outpace your competitors. And so I think it's a huge opportunity to look at how flexibility and building that into your offer can help you attract, retain, and also get the best yields out of your residents.
Yeah, it's interesting. I opened up with some thoughts around first principles thinking and thinking about, instead of just doing what we've always done, thinking differently about things. And, I remember a while ago, I was running a portfolio, and I came from a portfolio that had long-term contracts like anyone else, 6 months, 12-month leases. And you just were almost considered crazy to not have leases. And a lot of that's driven by probably the lenders looking at risk, not to have too much exposure and all these things. And these things get baked into our processes, and we just be repetitive. And I'm sure the lenders aren't spending as much time thinking about what the customer needs as we should be. And so we need to kind of sell that conversation up like, listen, that could actually be a risk with having leases. And I remember it was all about, if you had the flexibility, it was like you had to pay a premium. It was like $100 more a month to have the flexibility. But what I found very interesting was this whole portfolio was every lease was month to month.
Yep.
And I took over the company, and so I was thinking, well, I'm going to change that right away, right? and then I learned it was the most valuable asset we had, because what was interesting was every month everybody knew they could leave, but they didn't.
Yep.
But if you have a lease expiring in June, and we talked about this even in our office internally, is you're thinking like, oh boy, I only have this one shot to make a decision. Let me go and I don't know 8 months if I'm going to work where I'm working, and that pressure on the customer is different. And it's interesting for you to say the way that people are working, and then you add in the work. People are working in different places, and maybe even companies are going to retreats and corporate housing, all that stuff changes. So just a quick story on that, because I thought that was what you just said about the flexibility. It can be even a premium if we get the customer right. So let me ask you this question. If multifamily owners and operators want to get short-term rentals and these flexible rentals into their portfolios, what are some things that they should avoid, I guess? Have we learned stuff along the way, I'm sure?
Yeah, look, I think one of the things that I've seen happen over and over again is this idea of, okay, well, I want to do this, so I'm just going to put a few properties up on Airbnb and then just see what happens. And inevitably, it ends in disaster. Mainly because, first of all, you've got to understand who you're wanting to attract, but then you've also got to think about, well, what are the expectations of that person who's coming to stay? Now, when someone moves in as a long-term resident, it's small things like, they expect that they're going to have to buy a lot of things for the apartment themselves. When someone comes to stay in a short-term rental, they're expecting all the basics to be there. So it's having the apartments ready, but it's also, how are you managing it? Is your team trained? Do they understand how to manage a guest versus a renter? And what are their expectations going to be, and how does that differ? And so I think this idea that you just put it up on Airbnb and that's the solution, I think is where the challenges then arise. And of course, you can always hear about Airbnb disasters where something goes wrong, there's a party, there's this or that. But I think it's all about making sure you've got that right business model, and that you know who you're attracting and you know how you're going to manage it when they come.
Yeah, and let's talk about who best benefits from this is it? How do you look at it from asset class, location, urban areas? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of information around that.
Yeah, so look, I mean, I think the logical place to start is definitely in urban areas. And, of course, in urban areas, you're going to have a mix of demand, both from leisure travelers as well as corporates. And I think what's been interesting as well coming out of COVID, with things like the accreditation and the professional operators really coming together, is we now also have platforms like Trusted Stays. So, the opportunity for an operator or a multifamily owner to access actually more of those corporate stays exists more than it did before. So you're not just dependent on that leisure demand of people coming for weekend breaks and those sorts of things, but really attracting corporates, business travelers, and people relocating for business to actually come and stay in your development. But I think the other thing is always thinking about, well, is there a kind of anchor nearby? So when you're talking about a development, is there a hospital nearby, a university nearby? Is there, a business park or, a kind of group of businesses that are nearby that would benefit from having flexible accommodation nearby those types of facilities? And so it doesn't always have to be a major city. There are lots of other reasons why people need flexible accommodation. And so thinking about that in your location can really be one of the key drivers.
And in terms of business strategy, are you seeing people look at this as, well, we're stabilized to some point, let's take some of the vacant units and sort of use that as, we're always 10% vacant, whatever that is, and use that as a tool to, deal with vacancy? Or is there a better way strategically to look at this as a business?
And look, there are definitely people out there who use it to fill those kind of gaps in between renters and improve the yield when you're in a kind of stabilized period. But I really look at it strategically as an end-to-end life cycle. When you're launching a new development, it's really perfect to be able to hold firm on the rents that you want to get, but to have an income while you're filling it. So that's certainly of value. But I often say to people, it's also about figuring out, well, what is that base that you want to have in your development? And it might be 10 to 20% of the units. And then you could increase that or decrease that based on seasonality or managing those kind of void periods. But I think what's important is actually seeing it as something to support that core business. Because what this does is it actually gets new people coming in and staying there. And, one of the hardest things is finding those customers. Well, if you can use customers coming and staying for shorter periods as a way to convert those to be people that actually come and live there, or they tell their friends and they tell their colleagues, and therefore it actually becomes a route to acquiring the customers you want for your core business. And I think that's really the strategic value. There are other things you can also do on top. So, for example, I'm sure every operator has stories of how people go and put it up on Airbnb and then it causes problems and they need to manage it. So allowing your residents to actually sublet and do this for periods they're away might actually mean they stay longer. And they also don't do it in an unauthorized way. So by authorizing them and doing it through a kind of controlled way, it gives them the ability to offset rent if they're going to be away, but also to avoid those problems when they just go and try and do it on their own.
Yeah, and what does that look like from a technology standpoint? I mean, we all say Airbnb, but there's more to this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think there are a number of technologies that can help access this market, because I think the other challenge is, of course, that if you say, well, look, I'm just going to go post it on Airbnb, well, that's great. But no matter which platform you list it on, whether that's Airbnb, Expedia, Booking.com, or a combination of them, you also then need a software to manage it, because otherwise you're just going to get a bunch of Airbnb bookings coming in. How the heck are you going to manage all of that? And so there's systems out there that can help to do that. I've not spoken to them myself, but I understand Migo by RealPage If you want to just get onto Airbnb, that they've got a system that can help with that. Hosperia is a technology that will help plug you into all the different channels and provide that operational technology to execute. But I think choosing that technology and knowing whether you want to go for a single channel like Airbnb or a multi-channel that gets you not only into that leisure travel like Airbnb, but also into corporate and business channels. Ultimately, even the global distribution system, which is what powers a lot of the corporate and government stays. And so platforms like Trusted Stays can help you access that. So making sure that your technology gets you into all the channels that you want to access so that it all then funnels into one place and you can manage it in a single system. Otherwise, your team is probably going to kill you when they have stuff coming in from lots of different places.
Yeah, I guess what would be that formula? I'm trying to understand. I mean, obviously we're at the beginning stages of people really understanding this. It's a customer-driven approach here, but what would you say a formula, if someone's listening in, they haven't gone down the road of even entertaining this, what would that formula look like for them?
So look, I think there's three things. First of all is you need to know who you want to attract. So is it corporates and business travelers and that type of audience? Is it leisure? Is it a mix of the two? And how are you going to access those guests? So you can either find a partner company that will help you do that, or potentially build those relationships yourself if you're large enough to want to do that on your own. The second thing is once you know your strategy for channels is choosing your technology. And as I say, there are technologies out there if you want to only reach Airbnb or if you really want a multi-channel approach. So let's say you choose a technology like Hosperia. That's great. Then you know how you're going to set up your infrastructure. But then the third and most important decision that you need to make is actually how are you going to operate? Do you want to partner with someone in the short-term and holiday rental sector who's going to be able to do that management? Or do you want to have a team yourself or train your team to be able to do this on top of the things they're doing already? And both of those are completely valid approaches, especially depending on the size of the team you have, the size of the development. You may say, well, look, it's better to have an integrated team, or it's better to partner with someone else who's doing this in other places within the city I operate, and therefore gets better economies of scale than I would. But choosing that operator is really important, or choosing that operating model is critical, because that's how you're going to deliver against the expectations of the people coming to stay. And that will determine the success or failure of whether your model delivers you the revenues that you're looking to achieve.
Yeah, and I'm assuming a lot of conversations around training, like you mentioned, around how do you even train and support it based on the different experiences you're creating there. David says, Maryland, while at Oxford for 5.5 years, we acquired homes to rent for students. The colleges agreed to hold the students responsible for protecting the property from risk. Interesting point there. Very interesting. So, what are you tracking with the landscape? I guess where do you get your information with the landscape of just business travel and what these customers expect? And I guess when you know to go full in on this.
So, I mean, look, if you're, if you've got your development and you're thinking, look, I would like to optimize my yield, many owners as well as operators are constantly under pressure to increase that yield. And there are several ways you can do that. But of course, filling gaps, whether that is, wherever it might be in the life cycle, or by increasing the amount you're able to charge for the people who are staying or living in that development, are the obvious ways to improve that yield. But to do that is, you then need to know, how does this fit into your overall strategy? So I think making sure that you have that strategic approach, and it isn't just, oh, let's, throw a few properties up and see what happens, is really important. because you're going to have to invest in having the right technology, connecting that up with the other things you're doing so that it flows seamlessly for your team. And then ultimately, making sure that you've got that capability to make sure you can flex and get the real value out of this part of the value chain. And like I say, that may be in certain seasons that you want to increase that, particularly in places where there might be students who go away for the summer. Well, summer is actually one of the seasons where there's more demand. And so those improvements in yield might only be 1 or 2%, but we all know that 1 or 2%, if that's an improvement in yield on the overall development, has a massive impact on the profitability.
Are there cases you can talk about? I know maybe not identify, but of that impact financially that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that sort of 1% number is from some of the experiences that we've seen in the UK. And like I say, it's a combination of factors that helps to achieve that. It is that absorption or kind of lease up period at the beginning. It is that management of the gaps, but it is also that when you use seasonality in your favor, the renters market, there tend to be certain periods of the year when you almost can charge a little bit more because there's more demand. So if you're able to hold off properties until it's that sweet spot, imagine if you can charge just 5% more for that next long-term renter, how much that impacts the yield. So there is the incremental income you deliver through the flexible rentals, but it's also what it allows you to do in terms of holding firm or pricing upwards on those longer term rents as well. And that combination, I think, is that kind of magic formula that helps to deliver that 1% incremental yield on the development as a whole.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you're talking about even consumers. I mean, you get a flight, you know what the pricing elasticity to what the timing of it in terms of how quick to your trip versus what summer months, and if there's a concert in town, like all these types of things play out. But it sounds like it's making its way to multifamily here in the U.S. as well. Listen,
I mean, one thing to mention is that in our industry, pricing is extremely dynamic. It literally changes by the day. And so being able to capture that incremental revenue, of course, you need the right technology and stuff to do it, but most technologies will support people to be able to do that. And when you look ahead over a period, you're able to see what those, what we call ADRs, average daily rates, would be. And to have that information at hand to be able to say, look, let me hold off on putting this on the long-term rental market for 2 months, because these next 2 months are going to deliver me so much incremental value by doing more flexible rentals. I think that's hugely powerful.
Yeah, and I would imagine not just the dynamic aspect of it, but we just know that we may be leaving revenue on the table by not having this technology doing the work for us in many markets. I would love to spend a lot more time with you. I know we've got our Innovation Summit coming up. Maybe there's some time that we can go further into this. I just want the investors to see the possibilities and the opportunity lying ahead. And I'd love for us to spend more time later talking about that. But this has been wonderful. I appreciate you do a lot of great work for your service to just advancing the understanding of what's happening here. So I appreciate you showing up for our audience that way. We look forward to the opportunities really for what's next. If you're talking about 25 billion?
330 billion.
330, yes. So I was a little under on the 300, but we're close. But that opportunity probably will grow by the time we get there. But thank you for coming in. So great to spend the time with you. Tell us how we can get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can always find me, Merilee Karr, on LinkedIn. And obviously, you can get in touch as well by email. My email address is pretty simple. It's just merilee@underthedoormat.com. And, happy to speak about industry trends, challenges, or indeed anything I can do to help companies access this incredible market.
Awesome. So great to have you here, Merilee. Appreciate you coming on, and have a great week. And we'll be tracking all that you're doing with Under the Doormat.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me. Have a great day.
All right. We'll talk soon.